I always understood that success came with responsibility, especially when you have a sibling who views your accomplishments as a personal safety net rather than a standard to strive for. That sibling was Trevor Vance. I am Elias Vance, and I built Vance Development from the ground up, starting with nothing but a borrowed loan and a truly insane work ethic. By the time I was 38, I was handling multi-state commercial contracts, but the one project I couldn't seem to stabilize was my younger brother. Trevor Vance had tried, and spectacularly failed, at 3 different businesses: a dubious crypto mining startup, a highly leveraged restaurant that closed within 9 months, and, inexplicably, a luxury dog-walking service he abandoned after getting bored. Every time, I'd step in. I'd cover the debt, smooth over the creditors, and tell myself that this was the last time. But after the dog-walking fiasco, I realized I couldn't just keep handing him cash. He needed structure. He needed responsibility he couldn't pawn off. So, I offered him a career. The project was the Pinnacle Towers, a $50 million luxury apartment complex rising in a prime downtown district. It was complex, fast-paced, and required a constant stream of oversight. I put Trevor Vance in as executive project manager. This wasn't a ceremonial title. It gave him the keys to the kingdom, operational budget control, hiring and firing authority for subcontractors, and the ability to sign off on material orders up to 7 figures. All major disbursements were supposed to flow through centralized accounting and be cross-verified by our internal auditor, but for operational efficiency, Trevor Vance was the primary gatekeeper for spending. I justified this massive act of trust by telling myself I was giving him the ultimate opportunity to prove himself. The real truth? I was tired of hearing my own mother plead with me to take care of him. From the jump, the warning signs were flashing red, though I dismissed them as incompetence rather than malice. Trevor Vance didn't grasp the basic concepts of competitive bidding. Subcontractors he hired consistently charged 15 to 20% more than market rate, yet he defended them aggressively, claiming they were the only ones who could deliver. I remember sitting in my penthouse office with Trevor Vance 6 months into the build, reviewing the quarterly spending reports. He was wearing a tailor-made suit I knew was outside his pay grade, charged, I later found out, to an administrative supplies account. The third quarter expenditures are light on receipts, Trevor, I stated, tapping the screen of my tablet. Specifically, I need better reconciliation on the asphalt and paving subcontractor payments. They are running $800,000 over budget, and the parking garage isn't even half done. Trevor Vance leaned back, a smug smirk plastered on his face. Elias, relax. We're building our future here. It's all Vance money. I'm handling it. These are high-end guys, they deserve to be paid well. They're loyal. He waved his hand dismissively. What's the big deal? It's basically my inheritance anyway, just coming in early. That line, my inheritance sent a cold spike through my gut. He wasn't seeing this as a job or an opportunity. He saw the company, the millions I had earned through relentless sacrifice, as a communal pot meant for his enjoyment. There is no inheritance, Trevor, I said, my voice dangerously level. There is only what I have built. And you are managing a strict subset of that wealth. You will manage it professionally, or you will manage nothing. I threatened, I scolded, but I never pulled the plug. I allowed a deep, familial trust to blind me to the necessity of auditing his books immediately. I told myself I was protecting family, allowing him the breathing room to succeed. I gave him the rope, trusting he wouldn't use it to hang us both. He didn't just use the rope. He braided it into a snare. It happened exactly 11 months after Trevor Vance took the helm of Pinnacle Towers. Year-end financials required a mandatory forensic review before we could close the next construction loan tranche. I had assigned my sharpest, most cynical chief accountant, Sarah, to handle the review. She knew my systems, she knew exactly where the weak points were. Sarah walked into my office without knocking, which she never does, her face bone-white and rigid. She didn't sit down. She simply slid a printed ledger report across my immense mahogany desk. Elias, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I need you to look at the vendor reconciliation for Vance Development. Specifically, this material acquisition accounts tied to Pinnacle. I scanned the document, moving past the usual cost variances and vendor fees. Then I hit the summary of irregular disbursements. The total hit me like a physical blow. It was impossible, egregious, and meticulously documented across several hundred line items. $12,380,000. Not just poorly spent, but siphoned off. Systematically redirected through 3 complex layers of shell accounts and fraudulent vendor invoices, all rubber-stamped and approved by the executive project manager. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was existential. Trevor Vance hadn't just stolen from the company I built, he had stolen from me, his brother, using the very trust one had extended as the weapon. He had robbed me of $12 million, and he had signed his name all over the evidence. I looked at Sarah, feeling the cold weight of absolute fury settle in my chest. When does the next quarterly report meeting start? In 40 minutes, Elias. Trevor Vance is already waiting in the conference room. Good, I replied, folding the report precisely in half. Tell him I'll be late. I need to call my attorney first, and then I need to start figuring out exactly how to build a cage around a snake. The moment I folded that ledger report, the smoking gun detailing over $12 million siphoned out of Vance Development, the fury didn't incinerate me. Instead, it chilled me to the bone, transforming into a diamond-hard, terrifying clarity. Anger is a liability, calculation is a weapon. I stood there for 3 minutes, leaning on my desk, before making the call. My attorney, Marcus Thorne, didn't specialize in construction law, he specialized in making problems disappear, quietly and legally. Marcus, I said, bypassing all pleasantries. I need a team ready for immediate deployment. Forensic accounting, cyber, and a litigation package, simultaneous civil and criminal filings. Priority number 1, absolute discretion. No one inside the company knows this is happening, especially not the subject. I need everything contained and cross-referenced within 48 hours. I gave him the key details, including the exact figure, $12,380,000. Marcus Thorne, a man whose voice usually carried the weight of 1,000 ongoing crises, was silent for a long beat. This is your brother, Elias Vance, he finally stated, his voice low. Yes, I confirmed. And I need you to treat him exactly the same way you'd treat a hostile acquisition attempt. He is a criminal enterprise operating within my structure. Build the cage, Marcus. Secure the perimeter. Marcus understood. He assured me he would coordinate the silent extraction of digital evidence and financial records from the company's servers, ensuring the data flow to the external forensic team was seamless and undetectable. 45 minutes after Sarah had walked into my office, I entered the glass-walled conference room. Trevor Vance was seated at the far end of the long oak table, scrolling through his phone, a picture of relaxed confidence. He looked up and gave me a lazy smile. Cutting it close, Elias Vance, he commented, gesturing vaguely toward the untouched coffee service. Just waiting on you. This was the grey rock method, presenting a surface so dull, so unreactive, that the narcissist believes they have completely succeeded in their deception. I had to become utterly boring. Apologies, Trevor Vance, I said smoothly, pulling out the chair opposite him. A small smag with the Shanghai contracts. Standard bureaucratic friction. You know how it is. He chuckled, taking the bait. He liked it when I talked about the real money, the international deals, because it made the Pinnacle Towers project seem like an afterthought, a playground where he could operate without scrutiny. The meeting proceeded for the next 90 minutes as if the world wasn't dissolving beneath his feet. Trevor Vance presented the quarterly financials, hitting all the prepared talking points about schedule adherence and material costs. When he addressed the overruns and the lack of proper documentation for the asphalt subcontractor, the specific point that had flagged the fraud, he had a ready explanation. The usual bookkeeping errors, Elias Vance. We had some internal transfers hit the wrong GL codes. Sarah's team will sort it out. Nothing to stress about. We're still under budget on the overall CapEx, and the lenders are happy, right? I leaned back, steepled my fingers, and pretended to weigh the answer carefully. It's sloppy, Trevor Vance. Extremely sloppy. But yes, the lenders are currently satisfied, and the overall trajectory is holding. Just tighten up the reporting, please. No more administrative supplies charged to clothing accounts, either. His face flushed slightly at the last jab, but he quickly recovered, flashing the familiar charming grin that had fooled everyone but me, or, rather, everyone including me, until today. Will do, big brother. Always got to keep the ship tight. Anything else? No, I replied, standing up. Keep moving, Earth, Trevor Vance. You're doing a fine job. I'm proud of the progress. The phrase, "you're doing a fine job," felt like acid on my tongue, but it was the necessary lie. It ensured he felt secure, complacent, and untouchable. It bought me time. For the next week, while Trevor Vance was busy congratulating himself on his managerial genius, I built the inescapable cage. I set up an off-site, secure office downtown, codenamed Project Atlas, solely dedicated to compiling the evidence against Trevor Vance. The team was formidable: 2 forensic accountants who specialized in untangling international shell companies, 3 data analysts who mapped the wire transfers, and 1 private investigator, a former IRS special agent named Lena, whose job was purely to document Trevor Vance's newfound, extravagant lifestyle. We didn't just target the $12,380,000 missing from the Pinnacle Tower's budget. We followed the money to the end of every convoluted road. The bulk of the funds had been routed through 3 fictitious entities: Vance Logistics, Tower Stone Material, and Apex Acquisitions, all signed off by Trevor Vance. The money eventually landed in a personal trust in the Cayman Islands. What made the case so ironclad was the sheer, arrogant paperwork trail. Trevor Vance had used internal company email addresses, notarized company letterhead, and, crucially, had signed every fraudulent invoice and transfer request himself. He hadn't outsourced the criminal activity, he had made it his sole priority. Lena's reports were devastating. She tracked the funds being used to purchase 2 luxury sports cars, a $500,000 yacht moored in Miami, and, most critically, a down payment on a sprawling vacation villa in Cabo. Trevor Vance had even paid for a lavish, multi-day birthday party for his fiancée using a consulting fee routed through Tower Stone Material. He hadn't just stolen, he had advertised the theft. By the end of the week, I had a mountain of evidence, proof not just of internal theft, but of federal wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The package was ready for the prosecutors. I sat in the darkness of my penthouse apartment, reviewing the final summary. This was not a business correction, this was a personal surgical strike. He had used the shield of my name and my trust to defraud me, and in doing so, he had forfeited every right to protection, compassion, or pity. I picked up the phone to call Marcus. "It's time," I stated. "File everything. Civil first, freeze all personal assets, including the yacht and the villa. Then, send the package to the federal prosecutor's office. Ensure the warrants land before the end of the day." I knew the immediate consequence of this action. The moment the charges were filed, Trevor Vance would panic. He wouldn't retreat, he would attack. He would assume this was a hostile business takeover and that I, Elias Vance, was trying to cut him out. He would try to legally destroy me before I destroyed him. I was ready. Let the snake strike. I had already removed its fangs. The filing went through at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. By 8 a.m. the following morning, the trap began to vibrate. Marcus Thorne was methodical. The civil asset forfeiture requests hit first, a legal blitzkrieg designed to cut off every avenue of escape. The moment the restraining order was served freezing all accounts tied to Trevor Vance, including the Cayman Islands Trust, the yacht, and the Cabo Villa, Trevor Vance called me. I watched the screen of my company phone, letting it ring 6 times before answering. The name Trevor Vance flashed, a digital symbol of rapidly accelerating panic. "Elias Vance, what the hell is this?" His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual slick confidence. "My bank accounts are locked. My credit cards are being declined. Marcus Thorne sent me a cease and desist letter about the boat, the boat I bought with my own money, I leaned back in my chair, the noise reduction cancelling out the sound of the city 30 floors below. Good morning, Trevor Vance. I assume you received the communication from our legal department regarding the $12,380,000 shortfall in the Pinnacle Tower's budget. Shortfall? It's an accounting error. A disagreement. You can't legally strong-arm me out of my personal assets over a bureaucratic dispute, Elias Vance. This is corporate warfare. You think you can just steal what's mine? The sheer audacity was breathtaking. He had stolen over $12 million, and in his mind, I** was the thief for trying to reclaim it. There are no bureaucratic disputes, Trevor Vance, I stated, my voice even. There is only irrefutable evidence of wire fraud and embezzlement. You signed the documents. You controlled the shell corporations. We traced the funds from Vance Development's operating capital directly into your offshore trust. He didn't miss a beat. His narcissism immediately kicked in, swapping panic for aggression. You're wrong, Elias Vance. You're desperate. You messed up the financing on Pinnacle, and now you're trying to pin it on me. I've already called my lawyer. We're filing for immediate injunction. We're going to prove that you, Elias Vance, orchestrated this whole thing to force a buyout and cut me out of the company. I'm going to make this public. I'm going to ruin your pristine reputation. This was the attack I had anticipated. The snake, cornered, striking with its only weapon, a lie, packaged as a devastating legal claim. Trevor Vance believed that if he filed a lawsuit first, accusing me of financial malfeasance, he could muddy the waters enough to evade the federal charges. He thought he could turn the tables through audacity. Do what you need to do, Trevor Vance, I replied calmly. But you should know, the evidence package has already been delivered to the United States Attorney's Office. I suggest you retain counsel who specializes in federal white-collar defense, not civil litigation. I hung up, severing the connection before he could respond. The next 24 hours were exhilarating in their precision. Trevor Vance, true to his word, filed a massive lawsuit against Vance Development and against me personally, claiming malicious prosecution, elder abuse, a hilarious claim, given the 2-year age gap, and, most critically, alleging that the $12,380,000 was actually siphoned by me to fund a secret side venture, and he was being used as the fall guy. His public claims were designed to be explosive, landing in the inboxes of our key lending partners and hitting the local financial news circuits. It was a beautiful strike, for 30 minutes. Then Marcus Thorne deployed the counter-offensive. We held a press conference, which Trevor Vance didn't even know about, simultaneously filing 2 documents in response to his civil suit. First, a motion to dismiss, and second, a detailed, irrefutable summary of the forensic report we had compiled over the last 2 weeks, labeled Project Atlas. The key was the dating. Our evidence was already notarized and submitted to the U.S. Attorney before Trevor Vance filed his retaliatory suit. This immediately cast his claims not as legitimate legal action, but as a desperate, transparent attempt at obstruction of justice. Vance Development treats this attempt at distraction with the severity it deserves, Marcus Thorne read from the podium, directly addressing the cameras. Mr. Trevor Vance's claims are entirely baseless. In fact, we formally requested the assistance of federal authorities upon confirming that Mr. Trevor Vance systematically defrauded the company of over $12 million. We have provided all necessary documentation and fully support their ongoing investigation. The media frenzy died immediately, replaced by cold scrutiny aimed squarely at Trevor Vance. My partners and lenders received personalized, pre-written communications assuring them that the company's capital structure was sound, the fraud had been ring-fenced, and that the $12,380,000 loss was fully insured. Trevor Vance was now isolated. His assets were frozen, his countersuit was rendered moot, and the federal hammer was swinging toward him. For the next 4 days, I maintained absolute silence, working on other projects, conducting business as usual. I watched the clock, knowing that federal wire fraud charges carry significant weight, and that the package Marcus Thorne delivered was detailed enough to warrant immediate action. Trevor Vance was last seen, according to Lena surveillance reports, speeding toward his fiancée's parents' secluded estate outside the city, presumably to wait out the corporate misunderstanding. He believed he was merely enduring a temporary inconvenience. He didn't realize that I had secured the warrant information days ago. I knew exactly when and where the federal agents would be moving. The final stroke of irony had to be perfect. The physical manifestation of his consequences had to be undeniable, inescapable, and permanent. I had already instructed my acquisition team. They secured the final, crucial piece of land. It was a derelict, half-acre plot sitting directly across from the massive, granite-columned federal courthouse where, I knew, Trevor Vance would soon be arraigned, tried, and sentenced. I called the architect. "Start drafting the schematics," I commanded. "I want a 10-story, mixed-use commercial and residential building. I want the most aggressive, angular design we've ever produced. I want it towering over the entrance to that courthouse, utterly visible, a permanent reminder of the consequences of betrayal." "What's the working title, Elias Vance?" the architect asked. I looked out at the city I had built, thinking of the brother who tried to burn it down. "The working title is The Vigil," I said. "And I want the groundbreaking scheduled for the day Trevor Vance receives his verdict. He will look at that structure every time he enters the building, knowing I built his cage, right down to the pavement." For days passed in absolute silence, my silence. For Elias Vance, time was no longer a currency, it was a weapon used for maximum pressure application. I focused on international contracts, closed a massive deal in Tokyo, and generally allowed the corporate world to see that Vance Development was not merely surviving the scandal, but thriving through it. I ensured that every decision I made projected confidence, professionalism, and, most importantly, financial stability. Meanwhile, Trevor Vance, hiding out at his fiancée's parents' sprawling, isolated estate, was left stewing in his own paranoia. He was waiting for his civil lawyer to get an injunction, convinced that a few aggressive motions would restore his access to the $12,380,000 he viewed as his rightful plunder. He didn't understand the difference between a skirmish and a nuclear strike. I knew the exact moment the detonation occurred. Marcus Thorne didn't call me, he sent a 2-word text message, *a confirmed. 10:47 a.m. The execution itself was a masterpiece of precision, choreographed by the U.S. Attorney's Office, but guided by the intelligence provided by my private investigator, Lena. Trevor Vance, desperate for leverage and cash, had planned a covert trip back to the Pinnacle Towers site, the scene of his crime, ostensibly to check on the progress and retrieve a specific locked box containing personal documentation he believed would aid his civil defense. He arrived at the gate in his fiancée's borrowed SUV, flashing his old, now-defunct project manager ID card at the startled security guard. He swaggered onto the muddy construction site, oblivious to the fact that the entire area had been under quiet federal surveillance since dawn. When he reached the temporary office trailer, the moment he stepped onto the ground that his embezzled millions were supposed to be financing, the trap closed. 2 black, unmarked SUVs simultaneously blocked the exit of the service road. Before Trevor Vance could even register the vehicles, 6 federal agents, 3 from the FBI's white-collar crime division and 3 from the IRS's criminal investigation unit, were surrounding him. The humiliation was immediate and absolute. Trevor Vance, in a bespoke Italian overcoat and shoes that cost more than a month's salary for the average subcontractor, was standing in the mud, staring down the barrels of consequence. Trevor Vance, one of the agents stated, reading from a document. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement, totaling $12,380,000, stolen from Vance Development." Trevor Vance didn't rage, according to the later reports. He didn't even fight. He deflated, the air of toxic entitlement rushing out of him in a stunned gasp. He realized, in that moment, that the bureaucratic dispute was actually a criminal indictment, and the man he had trusted to cover his incompetence was the man who had laid the wire. He was cuffed, read his rights, and driven directly to the Federal Metropolitan Detention Center to be booked, processed, and held without bond, given the clear flight risk associated with the offshore accounts we had identified. I didn't watch the arrest in person, I didn't need the morbid satisfaction. I needed the result. The media coverage, once focused on a potential family feud, now swung entirely toward the criminality of Trevor Vance. The narrative was brutal. Younger brother bankrupts the trust of the widely successful Elias Vance through a sophisticated, multi-million-dollar fraud. Every article cited the $12,380,000 figure, reinforcing the gravity of the charges. The fallout continued to cascade. The civil lawsuits I filed, seeking restitution for the full $12.38 million plus damages, moved swiftly through discovery. Since the federal indictment provided ironclad proof of the fraud and systematic deception, the civil court ordered an immediate summary judgment against Trevor Vance. His remaining legitimate assets, his fractional interests in a few small holdings, and the equity from the seized sports cars and yacht were liquidated. Trevor Vance was financially obliterated. He was not just facing prison, he was facing a mountain of debt and legal fees, leaving him utterly dependent on court-appointed counsel for the criminal proceedings. I was relentless in ensuring the maximum legal severity. I instructed Marcus Thorne to ensure Vance Development cooperated fully, but with a caveat: under no circumstances would we agree to a plea deal that reduced the charges or the sentencing guideline exposure. Trevor Vance had tried to frame me for a financial crime. I would ensure he paid for the full extent of his own. Why no plea, Elias Vance? Marcus Thorne asked me, weeks later, after Trevor Vance had formally entered a not guilty plea and the trial date was set. He's facing 8 to 10 years. You've won. You have the money back via insurance and restitution orders. Because I didn't do this for the money, Marcus, I explained, gazing out over the skyline at the skeleton frame of Pinnacle Towers. I did this because he used the name I built, the trust one offered, and the family connection I cherished, as a license to steal. He needs to learn the true weight of that privilege. The trial was a formality. The evidence from Project Atlas was unassailable. The paper trail, the signed approvals, the flow of funds to the Cayman Islands Trust, it all pointed directly and unambiguously to Trevor Vance. The jury returned the verdict after 3 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning. I didn't attend, but I ensured the final piece of my consequence was in place. That morning, as the local news crews gathered outside the federal courthouse, my acquisition team hosted a modest but highly publicized groundbreaking ceremony across the street. As the judge delivered the verdict, a final sentence of 96 months in federal prison for the calculated theft of $12,380,000, Trevor Vance was forced to pass by the site on his way into custody. I received a photograph, taken by Lena, showing Trevor Vance being led into the courthouse. In the background, the vast, empty lot was now adorned with a massive billboard, a sharp, aggressive architectural rendering of a 10-story tower, its angular facade looming over the entrance. The title across the bottom of the rendering was bold, black, and utterly inescapable: The Vigil, a Vance Development property. Trevor Vance was now confined, incarcerated, and financially ruined. His inheritance was a cell, and the last thing he saw before the door closed was the undeniable truth: his own brother, Elias Vance, had built his prison. 2 years is a sufficient timeline to measure consequence. For a man who builds, 2 years means foundation set, steel topped out, and glass polished. For a man who steals, 2 years means the novelty of incarceration has worn off, replaced by the crushing weight of permanence. I am Elias Vance, and I stood on the 40th floor of the completed Pinnacle Towers, looking out over the city. The project that Trevor Vance had nearly destroyed, stealing $12,380,000, was now a shining testament to Vance Development's resilience. We had absorbed the hit, recouped the losses through asset liquidation and insurance claims, and opened the doors 6 months ahead of schedule. Pinnacle Towers was one of the most profitable projects in company history. My greatest source of satisfaction, however, was anchored just a few blocks away. The vigil was complete. It stood exactly where I intended, a 10-story, sharp-angled monolith of black glass and concrete, positioned directly across the plaza from the federal courthouse. It was aggressive and impossible to ignore. We leased the ground floor to a prestigious law firm, ensuring that the very place where Trevor Vance was sentenced would forever be associated with a property bearing my name. Every morning, the sun reflects off the vigil's facade, bathing the courthouse entrance in a light that seems entirely too sharp. The irony was not lost on the city, and certainly not on the primary subject of the vigil's purpose. Trevor Vance was now 2 years into his 96-month sentence, lodged deep inside a federal correctional institution far from the coastal cities he loved. His life had become exactly what he had feared most: tedious, low status, and completely dependent on the whims of others. The last of his personal effects were gone. The Cabo villa was sold for pennies on the dollar to cover civil fees. The fiancée, realizing she was tethered to a convicted felon facing half a decade of prison, vanished from his life 6 months after the sentencing. Marcus Thorne had ensured that every last dollar was clawed back. Trevor Vance owed the company more in legal fees than he had ever legitimately earned. I heard the updates through Lena, the former IRS agent turned private investigator. She maintained a quiet, passive interest in his welfare, mostly to ensure he wasn't attempting any further fraud from behind bars, but also to confirm the nature of his daily misery. The entitlement that had defined Trevor Vance's life, the self-belief that the world owed him everything, had not survived the transfer to a maximum security environment. It had been replaced by a bitter, helpless rage, directed mostly at me. He attempted to send me letters, filled with invective and desperate pleas for financial assistance. I never responded. My attorney's office filed them all under harassment correspondence and shredded them. Trevor Vance was forced to face the truth: I hadn't just exposed his crime, I had removed his ability to ever recover. The theft of $12,380,000 wasn't just a number, it was a permanent character flaw, documented in federal records and associated irrevocably with the name Vance. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun set behind the silhouette of the vigil. People often ask me, usually in hushed tones at industry dinners, if I regret what I did to my own brother. Did the loss of a familial bond sting? I answer truthfully, no. I regret the time I wasted allowing his incompetence to define my sense of family responsibility. I regret the initial moment of blindness when I handed him the keys to the kingdom. But I do not regret the consequences I built for him. Trevor Vance saw my success as a personal entitlement. He believed he could simply take the inheritance he felt was owed. He didn't understand the structure, the rules, or the sacrifice required to build a multi-million-dollar empire. He thought a complex business was a communal pot to be looted. The vigil is more than a commercial property, it is a permanent answer to that delusion. It is the monument to the principle that in my world, there is no communal pot, only carefully managed structures. And if you try to burn that structure down, the builder will ensure that your future is constructed entirely of consequences. He tried to build a fortune on lies, so I built his prison on stone, right where he could see it, forever reminding him of the name he disgraced, Vance.